I think now is as good a time as any. Let's get this going. All right, welcome to this session. The second day of talks. Yes, talking is something we still do. I represent New York City on the board here. Really proud to do that. Thanks again for attending the conference. I would introduce him with all his credentials. This is Nate Ferguson, but he has all his credentials in first slide. We have vetted everybody for this conference quite scrupulously. Thoroughly, scrupulously, with attention to detail, and he's worthy of your time, so thanks for coming. But also, like, for the future, if you guys want anything for next year, please be in touch with us throughout the year. We work for you. And without further ado, Nate Ferguson. Thank you very much. All right, so today we're going to talk about, I had to find kind of a catchy name to make people look at it. Is this too loud, by the way? No. We're good? All right, excellent. I had to find a catchy name to call this, so I called it the Cone of Truth. I'm hoping to show you more about what actually happens inside of the yeast cone, inside of your tank. So we're talking mainly today about smarter yeast management for better beer. Now, before we get into details, who the hell is this guy from Canada talking to you? Some of you I know you, some of you are some of my grads, so this is going to be appropriate. I'm Nate Ferguson. I'm one of the co-founders here of Escarpment Laboratories. My business partner and founder, Angus, is also back there. Two of us here today. We've been around for over 10 years, and outside of Escarpment Labs, I'm also one of the professors at Niagara College for the Brewmaster and Brewery Operations program, where I've been there for just almost 15 years, teaching mainly quality control, quality assurance, sensory, and microbiology. So we're kind of in my wheelhouse. I like doing this. So all the things that we do for Escarpment and I do for the college, our main goal, or my main goal, is to help share free, easy-to-access brewery knowledge with you so that you can improve the quality of your beer. Everything we do when it comes to educational content is free, which is why if you go on our website, you go to Escarpment's resources, we have over 80 entries of knowledge base, over 50 hours of free YouTube content on everything from yeast management, best practices, how to make good lagers. We also have, I think we're at episode at least 30 of our podcast now we released earlier this year. We're trying to release about one of those every single week. They're all free, easy access, try to make things that I find get gatekeeped behind kind of sciences, accessible and easy to understand and digestible for all, because that's a big issue when it comes to the academics. So, my goals today for this, just a quick show of hands, who here repitches yeast cells? Okay, if you did not put your hand up, my goal here is that I hope you get excited to want to go and do that, want to go try that. If you do repitch, my hope today is that this gives you more information so you can do it better. If you do repitch, you have a lab and everything's wonderful, I hope I can make your process smoother. I think everyone should be repitching yeast cells regardless of the type of yeast cells you use, whether it's dry yeast, liquid yeast, super fancy yeast, whatever it is, I think you should all be repitching your yeast cells. Now, the first thing we get from this, and before we get into any details for today, the first piece of resistance we always see is, do I need a lab in order to repitch yeast cells? And I want to be here to tell you unequivocally, no. But a lab is going to help. A lab is going to de-risk the process for you. That does not mean you should not do it. It does not mean it's not beneficial for you to do it. It just means it's going to help. Okay, and we're going to talk a bit more later on in the presentation today as to how we can go through that, or when it makes more sense for you to apply a lab and how to de-risk the entire situation. It's not required, but it's definitely a benefit. So, everything we're talking about today is all part of a new guide that we just released. It is free, so I don't feel bad. It didn't like me saying free. Oh no. Right?
Putting the laptop back in.
Interpretive dance.
I'll just get real close to my laptop up here. There we go. Okay. So everything we're talking about today is a part of our yeast repitching guide. You can find a hard copy upstairs. There's very few of them left, so just trying to steer people towards the digital version. But it is free. Just go online to our website. You get the full, it's almost 100 pages or so of just information all about repitching yeast cells, how to do it, when best practices, costs, risks, all that good stuff. So today we're going to talk about healthy fermentation formula, or kind of how I and we think about yeast cell health, cell vitality, not viability, and how this influences something that I think most people don't think about, which is pitching tolerance. So how much plus or minus you can be when it comes to your pitch rates. Cell counting, cell enumeration without a lab. So how can we figure out how many yeast cells we have inside of our jug, pitch of yeast, whatever it is, without having a microscope? Talk about some ways to do that. And then finally, talk about how we can store how you can store your yeast cells. Can I use plastic buckets? Should I not use plastic buckets? If it's just stainless, and the risk and versus reward for pitching. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Just so I got a pulse for the room. How are we doing? It's day 2 of a beer conference.
Better.
Better? You have a beer in your hand. This is good. All right. Good. All right. So we're gonna start off with the repitching formula. So I'm sure we've all seen something that looks like this, right? I see nodding. Excellent. Pitch rate, and typically we talk about it in million cells per mil per degree Plato. For ales, about 0.5 to 1 million cells per mil. Hefeweizens, wits, saisons on the low end. American ales, English ales on the higher end. And then for lagers, we use a higher range. Does anyone know where this came from? That's fair. It is there. No, this comes from originally research that was done by not craft breweries, by large-scale breweries, and they have a lot of assumptions for their yeast cells that don't necessarily pan out for a craft brewery. Don't pan out for anyone who is smaller. So this is missing a lot of information that if we really want to understand how a healthy fermentation occurs, we need to add. You good? Okay. It's all good. So what I want to introduce to you all is what we call the healthy fermentation formula, and it looks like this. So it's the first variable we have here is our cells pitch. This is what we're all familiar with, but it adds 2 very, very important additional variables that will have a lot of impact in the ability for us to have a healthy fermentation. Now the first one is just to the right, and the numerator is cell health. So this is how healthy our yeast cells are. We're going to talk a lot more about cell health in a second, so we're going to kind of punt that down the line a little bit. The one that everyone typically underemphasizes or doesn't think about well is their wort stress. Okay, because not all worts are going to have the same level of difficulty when it comes for the yeast cells to ferment. If we add, say, a ton of hops inside the beer, IBUs, are naturally antimicrobial. They will stress the yeast cell out. If we have very little oxygen content, so we didn't aerate our wort properly, that's also going to stress the yeast cells out. When we have insufficient fan or not the right type of fan, that is also going to stress the yeast cells out. This is why we can do things, and I'm just from conversations with you in the room the last 24 hours or so, I've heard a few of you mention this. You know, if we know we're under pitching a little bit, we're going to over aerate that batch in order to balance the whole thing out. By adding more oxygen, we're decreasing the denominator, increasing the chance of us having a healthy fermentation. I do want to take a little quick sidestep on here and talk about oxygen briefly. What aeration rates do we shoot for?
10 mils. 60 ppm.
It changes. Yeah. How do we figure that out?
12 years.
Sorry. So how do we those standards? Like, why do we shoot for 16? Why do we shoot for 12? Why don't we go higher? It's mainly mechanical limitation. It is mechanical limitation. If you're looking at this strictly from a yeast cell health standpoint, we could go higher and the cells would benefit. What we're typically looking for when it comes to wort aeration is that is the minimum amount of oxygen that's required in order for us to have a healthy fermentation. If we add more oxygen, we will be making it more likely for us to get there. Everything in extreme is bad, so don't push any one of these variables to extreme. Like, don't just pitch like 1 trillion cells per liter or something crazy for your beer. But these 3 variables in lockstep with each other are really the thing that govern whether or not we're going to have a healthy fermentation. Now, just do a quick show of hands. Who here is, say, underpitched or overpitched and still had the beer ferment absolutely great and taste great? I'm going to assume that the people who didn't put their hand up either don't pitch yeast or just didn't feel like putting their hand up. Almost everyone's experienced this, where we didn't exactly hit the numbers on and it still turned out great. It's because there were variables at play that you probably weren't aware of that allowed everything to turn out wonderful. Talk about this part already. So this formula is a little bit harder to kind of process, and I understand that. The two of the variables on here, especially viability and wort stress, we can't put a number to them. It's not like cells pitched, got there, where we know it's 0.5 mil to 1 million cells per mil. These other two are kind of touchy-feely. They're not quite analytic. But my hope for kind of showing you this is that it gives you a better understanding as to what variables are actually going to result in a proper beer. Beer, because we're dealing with an organism, it is a living organism that's making the alcohol. You don't make the alcohol, by the way. The yeast makes the alcohol. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. It's not chemistry. It's not, reagent A plus reagent B equals reagent C, product A. We have to work with the state of the living cell, the living organism we're trying to work with. So that's why these variables make sense. Any questions about this so far? Or how are we feeling about this?
Good.
All right, cool. It does look good. I think the graphics are quite nice. So I just want to give you a few kind of small examples on this, because this is how we kind of came about this. For years I was just teaching students the 0.5 to 1 million cells per mil, and that was kind of it. Then we'd have clients where they'd underpitch and the beer would turn out great, or they'd overpitch, the beer would turn out great. The hell? We're missing something here. Or we'd have clients where they're hitting their cell count, their pitch rates on point every single time, and the beer is variable. The beer is, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. This is what made us realize, there's variables here that we're missing. One of the worst cases we had of this was at one brewer where if they didn't hit their gravity for it, they just add sugar to it. So whenever they did this, it's the appropriate response. Snake rain is the appropriate response. But whenever this happened, the amount of nutrient, the fan concentration they were putting their yeast cells in just tanked. So all of a sudden, there's half as less protein, and we're trying to figure out why the beer didn't taste right. It's you stressed the thing out. No wonder. If you start thinking about some of the troubled fermentations you probably had in the past, this formula will likely make more and more sense. There's probably something that happened in the process that caused either the yeast cells to be less healthy, or the stress inside that fermentation to increase, which resulted in a poor ferment. It's not just the cell count. It's these other variables too. So with that, we're going to go into the details of this. This is next section 2. So this is yeast vitality. So, which one of these people is the healthiest? The normal guy? Okay, let's assume there's no roids or let's look at maybe healthy as the ability to do work, the ability to lift stuff, do heavy things. The guy on the left, the Arnold-looking individual of the Schwarzenegger variety. We can roughly look at humans and figure out whether or not they're healthy, whether they're not healthy. We can get an idea. If I had 20 pounds less, I'd probably be more vital. This is normal. Now, to call out on Arnold Schwarzenegger on this, I like to use him as an example for this thing. Now, as of last night, he is still alive. R.I.P. Chuck Norris. I'm sorry if this is you finding out about this. I did not think about that. If you had to move Arnold Schwarzenegger is 76 or 78 years old. He has had 2 heart surgeries. He is technically not allowed to lift heavy anymore. He's just older. If I had to move a ton of gravel, do I want Arnold Schwarzenegger from his Mr. Universe era or from a month and a half ago? Which one's going to be able to do more work? Mr. Universe, you trying to argue that he is more experienced? Let's simplify. Mr. Universe absolutely can. Mr. Universe is absolutely the correct answer here. He's able to do work, and more importantly, he's less likely to get hurt while doing that work. That's a really important one too. And he's less likely to make an error while he's doing that work. When we start looking at human vitality, these are really important metrics that we need to look at. These are the same metrics we need to look at when we're looking at yeast cell vitality too. Because the health of the yeast cell is going to be just as much important as how many cells there are, if not more. Just like how if we need to get a lot of work done, we need to choose our Arnold correctly. So making sure we have a good feel for what state our yeast cells are in, whether or not there are, Mr. Universe yeast cells or are very unhappy and very sad and sick yeast cells, will determine a lot about how the culture actually functions. Now here's where people often get messed up, have problems. Who knows what cell staining is? Cell counting. Okay, who's done it? Who does it frequently? Less hands, that's okay. That's okay. Will all of these look alive? Yeah. Are all the people in this room alive? I hope. Yeah. Physically, but not on the inside. If we're cell staining, we really can't tell the difference between a Mr. Universe yeast cell and a near-death yeast cell. It's very difficult for us to tell the difference between these three. This is where we start looking at the cell health, and the vitality of the culture becomes very, very important. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to start off with is nutrient, or just making sure we understand what the cells, what's important to them. If you want, we're not going to go into this today, but if you do want to make a copy of the guide, come to our booth. We have a whole guide on yeast nutrition. If you go online on our website, you pull up the QR code, you could get a whole guide on just how to increase the yeast cell vitality of your cultures. One of the main things that we see for cultures is their lack of B vitamins, or their need for B vitamins. We all probably know someone who takes B vitamins and gets like B12 shots or things like that for their health and all that stuff. Certain yeast cells are deficient in B vitamins. They just can't make them themselves. They have to get them from their environment. Here are some lager ones. Biergarten is the Augustiner strain. It's unique because it lacks the ability to produce a B vitamin called inositol. The Czech strains are almost always deficient in biotin or B7. 3470s kind of sucks at a lot of them. It's one of the things that makes it what it is. Making sure you provide sufficient numbers of these things is one of the best things you can do in order to increase the vitality of your culture. Period. Hands down. There's no other way around it. Now, just a quick moment for blatant self-promotion. I'm sorry. This is how we have our yeast nutrient. I always feel bad putting this in there, but there's a story for it. We originally made this, all the issues that we see with yeast strains because of certain B vitamins they're missing, or a certain other compound like panthenoic acid or something that they're missing. We had to know this stuff because when we're growing them, when we're manufacturing these yeast cells, we would see issues in the growths. So we had to make sure that we were adding this stuff into the propagations in order to make sure the yeast cells are super happy, healthy, and doing what you need them to do. So we started making this nutrient mix that we just started adding to all our propagations because it made our lives better and it made the product better. We had someone then come in for a tour and it's like, hey, can I buy that from you? I'm like, we never really thought about this. Selling the thing that we had as an internal solution externally, and that's how this was born. We use this stuff every day. We think it's great. Like, we use it for our own propagations. It works. I'm gonna stop doing that now. All right. So how do we tell if a yeast cell is our Arnold Schwarzenegger yeast cell of Mr. Universe fame or a modern one? Well, there's a few things we can kind of look at. Now, this is where I said earlier, when people were walking in, I don't know how well you're gonna be able to see this in the back. Sorry. There's a few things we're looking for under a microscope to tell us the culture is healthy. Now you'll notice here that are all these cells alive? For those who haven't done cell counts, the dead cells will look darker in color, significantly darker in color. I think there's one on the next slide. Actually, I think I removed that one. These are all live cells, but there's some visual indicators we can use to help us tell if the culture is healthy or not. So for those near the front, how much variation in size is there across the cells? A good amount. This is one of the signs that we're looking for if the cell culture is healthy or not. As the cells get older, as they start shriveling up and consuming more of their internal nutrients, they haven't been fed for a long time, they start shrinking in size. Now the healthy ones, they don't shrink as much. So we can get a good idea for this case as to how many of them are super healthy, how many of them are just barely alive. Like if we let them sit for a couple days, they'd start turning dark blue. This is looking at the cell size, the variation in cell size of all the live cells is a really good way for us to tell or infer what the vitality of the culture is, how healthy each individual cell is. Now the other thing to keep in mind here is this, are they all the same shape? Like when a cell shrinks, does it form any like pointy ends or kind of like less? Yeah, it does. That's another big thing we're looking for under the scope to tell us whether the culture is healthy or not. Ideal healthy cells are nice, they have smooth edges. They can be oval or oblong, depends on the cell line you're working with, like the culture you're working with. But we want the cultures to all have nice, smooth corners, or no corners, smooth edges. Whenever we see anything that's a bit sharper, that's a sign that something is going wrong as well. These are all ways that we can figure out whether the culture, how vital, how alive each culture is, each cell is. I find sometimes students get hung up on this. Does this make sense? Are we good?
Yeah.
All right. So this is what a culture that is a bit healthier would look like. You'll notice here that all the cells are about the same size. This is still about a culture that's about a week old or so. All alive, which is what we want. But the cells are less variable in size, much more smooth. Slightly, some are more ovoidal, some are a bit more oblong. But this is what kind of like a 1 week old healthy culture would look like. Why do you think we don't emphasize this as well, as much as say how many cells there are or what the viability is? I know I'm asking a bunch of people who are lightly hungover on a second day of a beer conference a question about science. I'm aware.
Qualitative, not quantitative.
Bingo. It is qualitative, not quantitative. It is not binary. It's not ones and zeros. It's not a number going up or going down. It is qualitative. It is harder for us to measure. But it is just as important as how many cells are there. So when you're doing cell counts, I cannot emphasize this enough. Look at the qualitative elements of the culture. Are the cells smooth? Are the cells all the same cult size? These are things that will tell you just as much about the culture, or if not more, than just, 95% alive. This is really, really important. I hope I've made the case for this so far. So how does this actually pan out when it comes to the brewery? Well, we've all seen that pitch rate. That is say 1 million cells per mil per degree Plato. The conversation is how much, how close do we have to be in that in order to get a healthy ferment is always on the top of my mind, but I'm kind of in this. If we look at the correlation between cell health and healthy fermentation, it kind of looks like this. Let's say we've all probably been in this situation. I have a bucket of yeast, or I have one brink of yeast. Do I add the whole brink or half the brink? Do I add more yeast cells? Do I add less yeast cells? Am I going to hit the pitch rate exactly to? I was going to say to the gram, but we have freedom units. Ounce to the ounce? Yeah.
We know what brand.
All right. Quick, how many grams of nets? All right. So the healthier the yeast cell goes, the more of that stress can be tolerated. The more of that, a tolerance can be present. So let's say I have super happy, healthy cells. Like I harvested these yeast cells yesterday. They finished fermenting 2 days ago. They have lots of nutrients to it. The wort was tons of fan in it. But I'm only going to add 50% of the cells I should normally add into the next beer. It's probably going to be fine. The more healthy the cell are, he's on the right-hand side here, the more tolerance we have for pitch rate. This is now, I have here, I just said it was under pitching. We can also overpitch. If I overpitch the amount of yeast cells into a beer, I'm essentially feeding each cell less. Okay, I'm feeding each cell less when I add more yeast cells into the batch. That is going to cause some stress. If the cells are already incredibly stressed, that stress that I've added by overpitching can break them and cause off flavors. However, if the culture is super healthy, it's fine. It's a completely tolerable level of stress. As the culture gets older, let's say I have yeast cells I harvested them 2 weeks ago, and they sat in the bottom of the fermenter for a week before I harvested them, and they've been in my cold room that fluctuates in temperature by 6 degrees Fahrenheit for that duration. My tolerance for those yeast cells will be very, very low. If I don't hit that pitch rate exactly, I'm going to have problems. So when we start looking at breweries that say, how does this brewery repitch their yeast cells without doing cell counts or without doing all this analytical testing that large guys do, this is how a lot of them get away with it. A lot of them get away with it by just focusing on yeast cell health. They make the yeast cells further to the right, focus on the health, and therefore giving themselves more tolerance for what's acceptable. Which means if their pitch rate's off by 25%, it's fine. If it's over by 25%, it's fine. When we focus on yeast cell health, a lot of the other problems that we see or the analytics we have to apply in a lab become less important. which might sound weird from a guy in a lab, but it's true. This is generally how these variables play with each other. We're good? Sweet. All right. So one other thing, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, so I'm gonna mention it, because I've had a handful of clients I've worked with and talked to where they don't understand this. So I'm hoping this will solve this. When do you determine how old your culture is? When does the timer start? If I harvested the yeast cells 2 days ago, is it a 2-day-old culture? Sorry?
Terminal, probably?
Yeah, depends when they hit terminal. You should be analyzing or counting, when does a timer start for how old this culture is, when the yeast cells hit terminal, when the yeast cells are no longer feeding on their environment. More often than not, though, actually, it used to be the case, not so much anymore, where we'll have a client go, yeah, I harvested the yeast cells yesterday, and they're not working. It's like, well, how long were in the bottom of the fermenter before that? Oh, 3 weeks. Okay, I understand. It's a 3-week-old culture now. It's very important that you are conscious of this fact, that as soon as the yeast cells stop consuming sugars, they are starting to die. They are starting to eat themselves literally alive. It's like you, but if you haven't eaten. You're eating you. Same things happen for the yeast cells. So just please make that bit. Now, some general timelines or guidance for how long can we keep a culture around. If we have more nutrition, if we have, we've made sure the yeast cells are highly vital before fermentation ends, they're going to last longer. That's it. Under normal conditions, ales can typically last about 2 weeks post-FG and still be pretty good. Lagers, a lot more strain variability on this, for lagers, but in general about 1 week. 3470 is the asterisk, can go 2 weeks, sometimes even 3 weeks. But any of your kind of more expressive, kind of higher end lager yeast, about 1 week is where you're typically looking before you start seeing some problems. Sooner is always better though. Yeah?
You're talking about time from harvest or just overall time? So from terminal?
From terminal. Yeah, for ideal conditions. We live in a non-ideal world, so I've seen weird shit happen. But there's always ways to kind of walk through it. So, to the extreme, can our yeast cells be too healthy? Can we do too much to make them, too well? Not really. We can't make them too well, but I do want to point one thing out. As yeast cells grow, so they're constantly producing bud scars to produce new yeast cells. Because of this reason, because of that single reason, yeast cells will never be 100% viable. There will always be some dead cells. Cells will never not die. There will always be some cell death, and that is expected. That is normal. Don't fret if you're 97% viability or something like that. That is phenomenal. That is great. That last couple percent is going to be present almost no matter what. Just keep that in mind. Don't go chasing that last little bit. All right, entering the third topic, and this is something that I've found a lot of traction with certain people. Quick hands up, who does not have a lab or who does not have a microscope? I'm going to assume that there's about 2 to 3 times as many people who would put their hand up. You just don't want to put your hand up. We have one client, they're by my house in Hamilton, where they own a microscope. The brewery's been in existence for about 8-9 years. It's still in the box. They have won, I want to say 2 years, the brewery has been best brewery in Canada. At least 1. I think they've had 2. And the microscope's still in the box. You can make really, really good beer without having a microscope. Now, will it help? Yes. And I keep on telling that owner, you need to set up your lab. But there's ways that you can kind of get around it. And this is one of the ways I want to show you guys as to how we can enumerate our culture roughly without having to have a lab. Something called settled yeast volume. Now, who's ever done this yourself or seen someone else, look at a yeast culture, maybe pick it up, swirl it around, feel it between your fingers and go, yeah, it looks good. Guilty. We can get a feel for this. However, I did this with myself and I tested this, being how much variability is in my tolerance for it feels good? And there's about 20-30%. Gets me roughly in the ballpark. My cells are really high vitality. We showed that tolerance graph just previously. It's going to be fine. But for those of us that want a bit more analytics, or a bit more kind of data to feel more comfortable about it, this is what we can use. So settled yeast volume is a very, very simple test. It is super low effort. Here's what you do. You take your yeast culture, You take a sample of your yeast culture, you put it in a graduated cylinder or some sort of cleared walled vessel, and you let it sit for about 48 hours. And you look at it again. That's it. It's very simple. So in this case we had a yeast culture of about, say, 10 liters or 1 liter, whatever, it doesn't really matter what it is. We let the culture settle down, and we didn't figure out how many liters or how many quarts. Liters, excellent. I never know, I'm sorry. I'm never sure which unit to use. 28. Sorry. We measure distance by moose antlers. Once we know this kind of settled volume, we can get a really good handle as to how much yeast is inside this culture. We also have certain standards, at least from internally we know. We know our foggy London settles to roughly 2 trillion cells per liter. We know that most Cali, your Philippi 001s, USO5s, Barbarian, I think, for Imperial. I can't recall all the equivalencies. Cali is settled around 3 trillion cells per liter. Our ISARs are around 4, most loggers are around 4, wits will eventually, it takes more than 48 hours, but will eventually settle to about 3 or so trillion cells per liter. We can then use this to figure out how many cells we have in whatever our brink is without a lab. So just another example for this. If I have a jug, this is a plastic jug, and I fill it with 10 liters total, it's about 11 inches in height. I let it sit for about 48 hours. If it settles out to say, 52% yeast cells in there, if it's foggy, roughly 2 trillion cells per liter, I know this is going to have roughly 10 trillion cells inside of it. I didn't do a lab count, I didn't do anything like that. I just let the yeast cells settle. I have a standard, and I can look at the thing and be like, yeah, it's pretty good. I didn't invent this. We didn't invent this. I took this from an old English brewery. This is how they used to do it. Like, we're talking pre-World War II. This is how a handful of English breweries were repitching. They just got glass. It was really expensive then, and measured it. This is really old school. It's not new. Now, you can replicate the same thing if you have a centrifuge. Centrifuging can make this happen in minutes, not days. All we do in this case is we have our sample, we fill it up, say 50 ml centrifuge tube, we spin it around, and we can figure out percent solids that way. Same exact protocols. That's it. It's not crazy. There's no fancy calculations or anything like that. It's really easy to do. Now, for this reason, we see a handful of people who are kind of small-scale harvesters who are using our cultures. They'll use the plastic jugs for this. They'll refill their yeast cells, their harvested yeast cells into a jug like this. That way they can actually see it. We're going to talk about plastic versus stainless in a bit, but this is an easy thing to do. It's very easy to kind of use the jug the yeast cells came from. I believe Imperial also sells their yeast in plastic jugs. I think Omega does as well. BSI, there we go. You can use the jug too. The jug it's sanitary. That's why we ship our product inside these things. Works very, very well. Now, the final question for this, because this is where I find people go to with it, is does this replace a cell count? No. No, it does not. It does not replace a cell count. A cell count is going to tell you a lot of other information that this is not going to. The cell count is going to tell us, just how we talked about before with the vitality, looking at the actual cells. That's very important for us to do. This is something that can help us make sure that the cell count is accurate. I doubt anyone else has done this, but there's a higher degree of error present in cell counts than most people realize. I just got the eyes from a handful of you. Okay, so if you're aware of this, I'll see this with my students where I'll get, say 10 students, give them the same culture, they'll all analyze it. We'll see 30, 40% variability amongst people. Even if I'm trained cell counters, you'll see 10, 15, 20% variability, especially on really flocculent strains like our English strains, NEPA strains, really highly packed strains. There's more variability. This test, SYV, functionally has lower variability. It's a really good check on cell counts. If we see a cell count and the cell count says it's 1 trillion cells per liter, but the culture looks like it's 2, we probably know that cell count needs to be redone. It's the thing that we'll do every now and then in-house for the lab, just to make sure that our cultures, all our data is where it's supposed to be, so we can feel better about the data. Make sense? Yeah. All right, cool. I'm used to classrooms where I'm talking to the students. I'm sorry if this is weird because you're having to talk to the presenter. This is what I do. All right, so the final one, risk versus reward. And this is where I find a lot of people when it comes to repitching struggle, or they don't emphasize one side of this. They either think the risk is so astronomically large that they shouldn't do it, or they're strictly focused on the reward but have no concept of what risk there is in repitching. So I'm hoping that with today we can kind of give you some numbers for it and really balance it out. Now, before I get into this, I go in the repitching guide, just to harken what we said before, I go heavy into the math on this and into the finances for it. We're not going to go as heavy today, but if you do want to go further into the economics of repitching and costs associated with it, really encourage you to go look at the guide. So I'll leave that there. So this is all Canadian, but the same thing applies for here, just our dollars are higher. So if someone sees like $700 yeast pitch for 10 hex and it's Canadian, just be aware. As we repitch a yeast cell, we can start thinking about the marginal yeast cost for each batch. So marginal yeast cost is the cost spread out across all the batches. So in this case here, we have our first gen, say it's $700 for a 10 hec pitch. If we then split that, we then reuse the culture 2 more times. That means we're going to go, $700 divided by 3 batches. So it's about $233 per batch. If I repitch the yeast cells from each of those tanks again, so I have 7 tanks total from the same pitch, it's about $100 per pitch. I've taken that yeast cost and spread it out or marginalized it across all the batches. Okay? This means that we can start looking at how much we're actually saving or spending by repitching each time. This is really, really important. This is the reward fraction of our yeast repitching. This is where I find the risk is where people, I think, don't rationalize it properly. So let's say we're brewing a 10-barrel batch of NEPA that costs us roughly $800 that this $700 pitch of yeast is going into. And we're talking $800 for labor, utilities, everything associated with it. If something fails and we have to dump the batch, it's going to cost about $800. Okay? Let's say we know that there's some process inside the entire manufacturing process that has a 1% chance of failure that results in this occurring. Just like how we marginalize or spread out that yeast cost across all the batches, we can now also spread out this risk cost across all the batches. So in this case, if it's say a 1% chance of contamination or failure, we can add $8 onto the manufacturing cost on every single time we make that batch. Know that the batch actually costs us $808 because there's a 1% fail rate. This is a marginalized risk cost of the whole thing. Now, when we start looking at how we handle our yeast cells is a risk, and if we don't do it correctly, it can cause the batch to fail. So I would argue that there's a cost associated with repitching yeast. There's a much larger cost of not repitching yeast, because we have to go buy new yeast, but there is absolutely a cost associated with this. Now, there's a big study that was done, you can probably find it, I want to say it was done by Harvard, but it might have been Stanford, don't quote me, where they looked at the ability for plastics and metals and different things like that to harbor contamination. This is the really important part here is it was uncleanable contamination. So let's say I had a piece of like stainless steel and we put just terrible things on top of it. But we could then clean it 100% and the chance of something getting in there is functionally 0. That would have a 0% risk. Through this process, what they found is that most food grade plastics have about a 0.9% chance of contamination, uncleanable contamination. Stainless steel is about 0.3. So we can use these to help us figure out the risk associated with contamination for different materials we work with. This means that plastic roughly has a 0.9%, sorry, $7.02, where stainless has about a 0.3 or $2.04, 40 cents. How many here, and I'm not judging, how many here have used plastic for repitching? I'll put my hand up, I've done it. Okay, I'm gonna, again, assume there's about 2 to 3 times many of you, but some of you just probably feel bad about it. It can work, but it's just aware that it needs to be, you need to know that you are adding more risk. If we look at the two different, and this is the issue for it, is that every single time we reuse the plastic or we reuse the stainless without doing a sterilization process between the two, this risk is not just additive, it's compounding. The risk builds on top of the previous and the previous and the previous risk, which means that we very quickly start seeing plastics contamination rates start to spike very, very quickly. It may not seem like a big difference, 0.9 to 0.2, what is it, 0.3? Yeah, 0.3. But over time, it really does compound differently, massively differently. Now, if we want to then do the math on this, and I swear we go into a lot more detail on this in the guide, we can use this risk and the cost associated with the risk and the marginal yeast savings to help us figure out when we should stop repitching. When does it actually no longer make sense? When does the amount of money that we're saving from repitching no longer outweigh the cost of potential risk associated with this process going wrong? So what we have here is about a $225 brick of yeast, again, Canadian. And just based on the math on this, it's around batch 4 where these two cross. After batch 4, if you're using plastic in this case, it's actually costing you more money per batch to repitch with that method. I walk through the formulas inside the guide. If you want, you can figure this number out exactly for yourself if you're looking to save money, which I think we all are. Really good way for us to start looking at how we manage risk, how we manage repitching, where the cost break benefit analysis is. So if you want to go more, I'd look there. I know it's early in the morning. We good?
Pretty good.
Okay. Interest perked, I hope. Peaked, I hope. So I just want to point another thing out, and I pulled this out from the Albany Home Depot yesterday. So if someone is in here, has not repitched before and is looking at this, one of the biggest pieces of resistance I find people when it comes to repitching is I don't want to have to go out and spend several $100s on a yeast brink. I don't want to have to go and take one of my kegs out of circulation, convert it into this, or spend like $1,000 or so to buy a stainless steel yeast brink. No way, it's not worth it. You can in theory use these. They are food grade, they are $6 from Home Depot. They have a lid. If you were to do this, I have some best practices for you. And I don't want to say I recommend this, I'm saying that there is definitely a cost-benefit analysis for you doing this. So if you were to do this, replace the buckets often. When you get a new pitch of yeast, replace the buckets. Do not, if say we got to our 3rd generation, we decided based on risk we're not going to go past that 3rd, get new buckets with it. You'll probably need 3 of them. It's $18. You're going to save that very quickly, and it's going to reduce the risk significantly. Only 1 strain per bucket. So don't go like, we're going to use my NEPA in this, and then next week our lager yeast, because we can't really clean them fully, so they're going to cross-contaminate each other. And we're not in use, fill with sanitizer. I prefer PAA. That's my sanitizer of choice, but you do you. If you are going to use plastic, this is what I'd recommend you do. I think everyone should be repitching yeast. Even if you're using like cheap commodity yeast, whatever it is, I think you should be repitching yeast cells. It's an easy way to do it. Any questions about this so far? We're going to have a little Q&A thing at the end. I've lost track of time. We're 45 minutes in. How long are we supposed to go for? An hour or is it more? We may go a bit longer. Are we good? Sweet. So yeah, this is, if you want to repitch, this is what I'd recommend. If you have no infrastructure, very little money to do so, this is how I'd recommend you start repitching. Now, I do want to point one thing out here. And this is just based on a conversation I was having with someone yesterday. And it was based on, you'll see breweries, say, pitch their yeast cells. This is a friend of the brewery and a former employee, now getting his marine electrician license. Something like that. He's going to do fancy stuff out in oil rigs. They'll keep the jugs, and they'll keep them around for reuse. If you're buying liquid cultures, that is a plastic jug, just like the plastic bucket is a plastic jug, or a plastic container. You can refill these things, no problem, and use that to do the SYV analysis on them and dump them back in. Jugs work great too. Doesn't have to use buckets, just any sort of plastic container. All right, now I said there's only 4 topics, but I have a bonus one, because I wanted to talk about this too, but I was worried about time. So we appear to have some time, so for everyone's game, we're going to talk about this one as well. And this is crashing and cropping. So has anyone ever seen an image like what we see on the left-hand side, where our yeast cells cleanly break into kind of 3 nice little bands, our poor flocculate or thin yeast on the top, our ideal and healthy yeast in the middle, and our trub or dead yeast in the bottom? Yeah. Okay, so just like the pitching formula, which was designed in... No. Designed in macro breweries, not craft breweries. The formula, so the image you're seeing on the left is what I taught for years until I started really looking at it and being like, does this work for craft? It doesn't. It doesn't work for craft breweries. It wasn't designed in craft breweries. It was designed for fermenters that are, 600 barrels, not 20. We don't see the level of the gradations form. We don't see this nice stratification layer that occurs. I don't want to say it's wrong, it's just not applicable for us. What's more accurate is what we see on the right, where we still have our trub or dead yeast. We'll talk about that in a second. Then above that, we have just kind of a gradient of ideal or healthy yeast cells kind of near the bottom, which then gets thinner and less ideal as it goes further. There is no clear break or band like you see the macrobrewery textbooks talk about. We have more of a soft gradient across the entire area because our scale is an order of magnitude smaller. It's an important thing, kind of reference point. We will not see this kind of nice band break of viability differences. It just doesn't happen. Now, the biggest issue we see when it comes to people trying to harvest their yeast cells is tunneling. Who's experienced tunneling? Yeah, everyone's hands up. That's about right. So the thing that causes tunneling, I think, is poorly understood. And what causes tunneling is inconsistent compaction. So compaction is how tightly the yeast cells form together with each other. So liquid is going to go through the path of least resistance. It's going to find the weakest point or the least compact area inside that yeast cake to flow and tunnel through. If we have complete uniform compaction in a yeast cake, we are not going to have any sort of issues with tunneling because the path of least resistance is push everything out. As soon as we start having variations in density across this cone, we're going to start seeing tunneling issues occur. Now, for those who aren't aware, just to say it, tunneling is typically the situation where we have lots of yeast cells still present inside of our cone, usually stuck onto the walls of the tank, like you see here. But the beer is then allowed to pass through, not letting the yeast cells come out, typically due to overcompaction. So what causes it? Well, one of the biggest things that causes it is crash speed. Anyone familiar with Cuzme? Or, what am I blanking on the guy's name? He's German, Narcissus, there we go. Both these two are very avid proponents of slowly crashing the beer for this reason. My Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion is a little iffy, so going from, say, fermentation temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius, which I think is, 32, 38, that causes some issues with the yeast cells. It causes them to suddenly have to just plummet through. Now, the biggest issue it causes is that the yeast cells can't actually react to their environment. If you slowly cool the yeast culture, what we're essentially allowing the yeast cells to do is, who's heard of flocculin, or the flocculation proteins? Okay, when we slowly cool the yeast cells, what we're telling them is like, hey, this is going to happen, get ready. And they'll start producing more flocculin. They'll start binding to each other, kumbaya, hold hands, everything's good. And they can slowly, compactly go down together. When we cold crash the beers, we don't give the yeast cells enough time to produce the proteins associated with flocculation. And what ends up happening is we get chunks. Some parts prepared, and they're great, but they're over compact over here. Other parts couldn't react, and they're still fluffy, but they were dragged down with everything else. This helps create variabilities or variations in compaction. Now, another way to think about this, and I have to thank one of my students for this, he recently graduated, is Tetris. Have we all played Tetris? Yeah, okay. So what happens the more we play Tetris? It goes faster, the music speeds up, and our anxiety increases. Which one, when at the beginning, when it's slow, is it easier for us to make sure everything fits nice and tight? Yeah, as it goes too fast, it's more likely to cause, issues, holes, inconsistent compaction inside of the yeast bed. Just like when we're playing Tetris and it's very, very fast, we're more likely to cause errors. Same thing's happening for yeast cells. And when we do this, we're going to see, like we see on the right-hand side with the fast crash, we're going to see more of these differences in densities, which will create passive least resistance for the beer to flow through and our yeast to remain, which will give us a bad time. I hope this makes sense. All right, cool, good. I thought so too. I can't take credit for it. I cannot take credit for it, but that's fair. I'm not going to. So it's not the only thing that causes some variations in this. So I just want to point out a few other things. Trapped gas is also a huge source of variabilities in density. So if we're spunning a tank, where we're capturing CO2 from the top of the tank, that's fine. It's not necessarily going to cause it. What will cause it is, say, we're opening the tank to relieve some pressure and then closing it back up. That will cause CO2 variations that's inside the yeast cake and cause, increase our chance for tunneling. Now that can happen like a day later. It may not happen today. It can cause us problems in the future. Yeah, also cold crashing too hard, too cold. If we cause the yeast cells to go like near freezing, this can also cause us to see oddities in compaction where the yeast cells just get even more and more compact, resulting in kind of secondary tunneling. The other thing for this is that if we let our yeast cells just sit in the cone for too long, they're going to become more and more compact, and our chance of tunneling is going to increase. More and more, I'm sure we're all seeing, due to dry hop issues and making sure we get our yeast cells off our beers before we dry hop. Harvesting, when I first started brewing, was like you did it like a week or two or a couple days after fermentation hit. Now we're seeing a lot of breweries, pull their yeast cells a day before fermentations hit, which sucks because it's a lot of volume. I'm sure we've all done it. Or recently after. We're going to have a more consistent, more flowable culture, which is easier to handle, which is great, and it's less likely to tunnel. If we let that yeast cell culture sit in there for, say, 2 weeks, it's going to compact more. This is one of the first brewery I ever worked at. We were using a highly flocculent English strain. We let it sit in there for, I think, 5 days. It was like a 20 hectoliter tank or something like that. And it compacted so much we opened the bottom valve. It was a 2-inch valve, not a 1.5 inch, and nothing flew out. These strains will overcompact sometimes very quickly, especially some of the English ones. So time is another big variable when it comes to tunneling. If you find that you are having a lot of issues with tunneling, just simply harvesting sooner can be one of the best things you can do to solve this problem. That's really the summary for what I wanted to cover today. To give you a quick rundown, healthy fermentation is more than just how many cells you add. It's also a lot to do with the cell health and wort stress. Cell vitality is much, much more important, or equally as important, I would say, as cell viability. Everyone focuses on cell viability because it's quantitative, not qualitative, but cell vitality is super important. If you don't have a lab, SYV is a great way for you to help enumerate your yeast cells. If you don't have any sort of lab techniques or you want a very basic way to do it, it's a great way to get started, but I do encourage you to eventually get a lab. Stainless or plastic can be used to harvest. I recommend stainless. Fermentation, thing we didn't also talk about, we can sterilize stainless. We can bring it up to over 100 Celsius, 212 Fahrenheit, and functionally sterilize the device. If we do that for plastic, it melts. So we can't do that. But so stainless, that 0.3% rate, we can break down to zero and stop its compounding by sterilizing the equipment. We can't do it with plastic. We have to get new plastic. And consider yeast compaction. And be aware that yeast compaction is the key for understanding how when tunneling occurs. And that will allow you to get more yeast cells out of your cones than hopefully you do currently. So just a little quick bit, if you want to learn more about all the things we talked about today, we have a yeast guide. It's 100 pages long. Come see us at the booth. We'll give you links for it. It's great. Worked like a year on this thing. Really happy with it. I'll say thank you for your time, and if there's any questions, we can talk about them now. Okay, we're going to go first come, first serve, so you in the blue.
What's the main reason for differences in shape between like circular and more oval?
I can give you the easy answer, just the differences in DNA. So if you look at a lot of ale yeast, we're talking about English ale yeast and things like that, they're completely just Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Genetically, they're going to create that strain. When we start looking at some of the Weizen yeast, they'll actually form things called pseudohyphae, especially the wits and some of the Kveik's even, where they're kind of branching one to the other. To my knowledge, they have a deficiency in the gene that's associated with separating the yeast cells from each other, which then causes them to have this weird shape. For lager yeast, that oblong or kind of ovoidal culture is actually due to half their DNA being from an organism called Saccharomyces eubayanus, which is an oval. That's just a natural state of the organism, is that oval. So we kind of see that slightly ovoidal is because lager yeast is half cerevisiae and half eubayanus, which kind of gives it a half circle, half oval structure to it. So it's just the DNA. That's the main cause for it.
Real quick comment.
Yeah.
I took a 6-hole and had a local welder put a couple of 1.5 fittings on it, and then made myself 5-gallon D-spring stainless steel D-spring.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's just pretty simple, and you clean it when I clean kegs, throw a couple of valves on the outlet, and we're going.
That's excellent. I'm not sure the first review said it. A 6-hole?
The 6-hole.
20-liter keg. Understood. That's great. Yeah, that's what you want. I'm not sure who was next. I think it was you in the green.
For cracking seed, I
Yeah.
found like 2 degrees a day, like it's Fahrenheit, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, 6 degrees, like is there a better or worse?
I'm going to
or-
speak Celsius and convert to Fahrenheit. So Narcissus and Cuzme both recommend 1 to 2 degrees Celsius per day. So that's about 2 to 4 degree Fahrenheit per day. Now, the cool thing about this, though, is that you often see greater warp clarity when you do that steady crash. I have a whole video on this for our logger series, if anyone wants to go into the nitty gritty for it. I'm going to say that a lot. I'm sorry. We have resources. We want you guys to use them. But when we also see protein separation occur more completely when we do a slower crash. All the different chemical bonds, like the positive and negative charge that are inside the liquid, when we slowly crash, just like how the Tetris we saw before, they can more easily bind to each other and form a clearer beer faster. So the step crash might sound like we're slow, but it often is the slower we go, the faster the beer finishes. There's that analogy, go slow to go fast. It kind of has an application here.
Cool.
Yeah, but like 1 to 2 degrees C or 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit a day is kind of where they recommend, especially for lager yeast. I think you had a hand up next. Yeah.
This is for viability, not vitality. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
But,
It's very important.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on spunding and that effect on viability? I used to spund 90% of our beers to 15 psi, and when I really started digging into taking viability every single week, I was noticing when I was missing closing off the tank, my viability started to go up.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I started just stopping to try and aim for 15, and now it's like keep it under 10.
Okay.
And
So-
I'll use a little extra CO2 because that'll not recapture, but the trade-off is higher viability.
So I'm going to give you the principles, not necessarily what you should do.
Fair.
Okay. So one of the issues when we're doing a spunding is we're carbonating the beer, but we're also carbonating the yeast cells, which might sound a little bit weird, but all like the cytosol, the juice inside the cell, is also carbonated when we spund. So if the cell's wall's integrity isn't super high, as we take the pressure off when we harvest our yeast cells, that CO2 launches from inside the cell to the outside of the cell, rupturing holes inside the membrane, killing the cells. So spunding can cause decreases in viability.
Decompression sickness, what we call the diving.
Exactly, it's very similar to decompression sickness. So that is absolutely a thing that occurs. Now, if you're going to be, say, harvesting your yeast cells sooner, that you can kind of avoid it. If you slowly bleed the yeast cells, the pressure off the yeast cells, that can avoid it. But yeah, you're going to see that happen. There's no way around it. Now, what pressure you go to, that's a harder one as to say what's the fail end on it. Now, yeast cells can handle like hydrostatic pressure, carbonic acid pressure. That's not an issue. The issue is the sudden shift. Because the pressure is slowly applied, the yeast cells can balance it out and restructure the membranes inside to handle the steady increase in pressure. Where we see issues is where it's a sudden increase or a sudden decrease in pressure. So I don't necessarily say go to 10 or go to 15. If you're finding that 10 gives you healthier cultures on the repitch, I would opt to go for that.
5 now. Like that's my number per hour house strain. Like I don't really want to see it go over 5 or 7 any longer.
Okay.
Because that's giving me the highest viabilities, and it's just a trade-off.
Is it a lager yeast?
Be a cold strain.
Yeah. So the other part I'd be wanting to look at this is just what's your so that's the viability portion on it. There's also the sulfur profile. Like as we go higher concentrations higher PSIs, we're going to see more sulfur retained.
Sure.
Which if you want that in the beer, that's really the only way you're going to get it.
Yeah.
So Kolsch often has a little bit of sulfur on it, so it depends what you're shooting for. But yeah, as long as you can kind of gently decarbonate, it shouldn't really matter how high it goes. What I find though is this is a client I was dealing with about a month ago now. They had their tank at 15 psi and their brink under 0. So as their yeast cells were going in, it was foaming like mad.
Right.
And then things were dead because they just they essentially emulsified and killed half the yeast cells when you do that. So if your brink is pressurized during transfer, it's fine. But you can go much higher. But if you don't have that, yeah, 5 probably makes a lot of sense. I hope that answered or kind of insight. Okay, good.
I have one question and one comment.
Yeah.
The question is, I don't think many breweries are heat sterilizing their drinks.
I would.
According to that chart, it seems like we should be doing it about every 8th time at least.
So stainless steel is pretty. Where are we here?
Heat sterilizing is really hard.
There we go. So stainless steel is the bottom line here, and you'll see it stays very, very low. It's like it will compound, but it's compounded at 0.3% interest is kind of a way to think about it. It's a very low rate. I would still recommend that you change the sterilization method every now and then. So like caustic is very good, especially high concentration caustic, at removing things that the caustic gets in contact with. Heat doesn't matter what something gets in contact with, it radiates. So I'll use Escarpment as an example. We steam inject everything. We get everything to about 110 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes. Like our propagation tanks, everything gets heat, like pasteurized, sterilized before we use anything. Now that's just how now for us, like a small risk for us is a huge risk for you guys. So we have to hold ourselves to a much higher standard than what you'd be using in the brewery. But it's a very good practice to heat sterilize or just use something else to sterilize a device every now and then. Because what you'll find is that, say, organism A may die from condition A, or cleaning A, but organism B doesn't, or they'll die like 80%. If we add the second one, it hopefully switches to the other one and kills that other thing that the first one is allowing to thrive. Standard, like if you look at other food manufacturing processes, like switching up sterilizers, not on a frequent basis, but every quarter is a really good idea. You also had a comment?
I did. If anybody has the Nexlom now Revity Salometer, it will give you a distribution of cell size.
Sweet.
And quantify that.
Yeah. We have a camera that's attached to a microscope. We also have a thing called a cell drop, which is awesome, but it's expensive, and I don't think it works for most breweries, but for us, it's great. If you get pictures of it, you can now run it through just like, I saw one client doing this, where they just took 2 pictures from their scope, put them in AI, and said, are they the same? It's like, yeah, it's fine, and it's fine enough. It kind of told the tolerances, and yeah. Yeah.
If you're doing a slow crash or you're doing that 1 to 2 C a day, obviously that's going to take time to get your beer all the way down to full crash. Is there a window in there that you think is the ideal place for harvesting? Do you want to get all the way cold first, or do you want to go part way? Or?
Great question. So you can harvest before you hit final temperature. You absolutely can. If you go to one of the Germans, and I'll just go back to what Cuzme and Marzus recommend, is actually frequent cropping. So they crop kind of the first chunk, let it go for a day or two, crop more. You don't have to get everything in one shot. You can do it over several days. There's another point I was going to make there. Right, that's what it was. When it comes to the impact, it's like, how far down should it go? I'll use ale yeast as an example for this. Between the temperatures of about 12/14 to about 16, 18, that kind of like mid-teens Celsius. My Fahrenheit conversion is terrible, I'm sorry. That's when the yeast cells are actually producing additional flocculation proteins based on temperature decrease. So once they get below 10, it's still too cold. They can't do anything. Like once it gets below 10, we're at strictly mechanical, increased solubility of gases, colder temperatures cause things to set faster. We're strictly mechanical below 10. Between 16, 18, and 10, we're in the yeast cells actually responding to temperature. So if you get it down to that point, you're gonna you can start harvesting around 10 degrees C. And that's all. And practically speaking, I don't know if you guys see this here, but we see a lot of people kind of doing a soft crash before dry hop, where they'll crash down to say 14 Celsius and let it sit down there near the end of fermentation for a day or two. They're unknowingly causing this extra expression of these flocculation proteins to kick on, which is why it works. I think I saw one other hand up. I got one other thing I wanted to mention, and this is just, I think it's people trying to come in here, but, oh no, this is someone looking in. This just has to do with a question I received yesterday, and I wanted to mention it. Who here uses methylene blue for cell counts? Who here uses trypan blue? Who here uses erythrocin B? Hell yeah. Okay, let's explain the difference. There are 3 stains that are commonly used. I had a few conversations with people yesterday about this, and I told them I'd do this. They don't all work the same way, and people don't realize they don't work the same way. So, and we had where I first learned this was that we had a client about 5 years ago, pre-COVID, where they switched brewing protocols a little bit. They weren't realize they had switched it, and their culture went from looking like 95% alive to about 10% alive. But then when they had to use it, because we couldn't get cultures from soon enough, the culture ripped. It performed great. So they had these cultures that looked dead and with under the scope, but performed amazingly. So we had to do some work into this. So how methylene blue works is that methylene blue, and we're not going to talk about like people in your government about eating it. Just, we're not doing that. It's going to come up. We're not getting involved in it. Methylene blue enters every single cell, alive and dead. Enters everything. Now, cells will then break down the blue and turn it colorless. But this is going to be based on how able they are to respond. A dead cell can't respond, so it stays blue. A very healthy, alive, like active fermentation cell will do it right away. The issue comes when we have alive but dormant, like cold crash cells, especially when they say the culture's been sitting for a week versus a day. That culture that's been cold crashed for a day or harvested yesterday is going to respond much more rapidly and break down that dye quite quickly. If the culture has been, say, cold crashed for a week and a half, and it's very asleep, like hibernating levels of asleep, it may look dead, but actually be alive. And this is what this brewery I'm referring to had. They were using methylene blue, and they had this issue occur, where the cells were all alive, but they had been really cold. It was a new glycol chiller for the new build out. It was actually at like negative, like 1 degree Celsius, not 0, or like 2 degrees C they're used to. It was like super cool. And this led to a lot of false negatives, or yeast cells that look dead but aren't. Now, trypan blue and erythrocin B have a different mechanism of action. They work differently. They enter dead cells. That's it. This can cause the inverse of this error. If the cell is, say, on that death's doorbed, like we saw some of the cells earlier, the low vitality cells, it's still alive. It's not going to enter that cell. So methylene blue will, like those very low vitality cells, it will often call them dead. Low vitality cells, methylene blue will typically color as dead. Erythrocin B and methylene blue, and trypan blue don't. If it's geriatric, on death's door, it's not dead yet. It's like the thing from Monty Python. But it's not going to get better. It will not go pink or blue. They have slightly different mechanisms of action I think you need to be aware of. In aggregate, trypan blue and erythrocin B do give us more accurate results in aggregate, but there is this issue, and if you find yourself in the extreme cases, it's extreme. Now there's also an issue. Methylene blue, if you look at the SDS, says harmful as swallowed. I'm going to give the devil's due on this one. I looked into some of the research saying that you can consume methylene blue. They make some surprisingly well-researched claims. I'm going to stay agnostic on this one. The SDS says harmful as swallowed. I'm going to leave it there. Okay? Trypan blue has been shown to cause cancer in rats. So if you are using trypan blue, like gloves, new gloves, make sure it's safe. And now erythrocin B is also known as red number 3. Earlier in your life, you've probably consumed a lot of this already. However, your government, as of late 2025, banned this compound in food. Due to the guy who's consuming methylene blue. I can't square that one, and it's just too... Again, it's surprisingly well researched. I have a hard time with this. But it's less mutagenic than trypan blue. It has been shown to be a lesser risk than trypan blue. So for this reason, we do recommend erythrocin B. It's pink, it's not red, or pinky red instead of blue. I would encourage you to look at this mainly from a health and safety and from an accuracy standpoint. It's about the same price too. Trypan blue can be a lot more expensive, at least in Canada. I don't know if there's just tariffs or things like that associated with it, or our government taxes a lot of things. We recommend erythrocin B for this reason. It seems to be kind of the best of both worlds. Just be aware it's now pink. The other question I got asked a few times yesterday was how much material should we drop from our cone before we start harvesting our yeast cells. We didn't talk about this earlier, and it is an important part. So for those who didn't know, just make sure all the yeast cells during your ferment that are dead will settle to the bottom. And this forms a lot of that darky trub yeast that we see at the bottom of the tank, and we have to dump that. Now, how much we dump is variable, very variable. If we have trubs, we had a lot of trub carryover from our whirlpool or boil kettle into the fermenter, there's going to be more non-alive material at the bottom of the tank that we have to disgorge before we can do anything with. So we have to discard, we have to get rid of more. Certain brands, like say IPAs in general, or just higher protein beers, will typically have more we have to remove from the bottom versus say like a light pale ale or a blonde ale. There's going to be less. There is no standard, disgorge, 10 liters for a 20 barrel tank. It doesn't really exist because of these variables. However, the classic taste it and until it tastes good is surprisingly shockingly accurate. If it looks good and it tastes good, it's gonna be okay. It might sound very rudimentary or basic, but there is no analytics on this because of all the variables that go into it. So taste it and use your mouth. Smell it too. Yeah, should smell slightly bready. If it tastes too sharp, acidic, or kind of meaty, like autolytic-y, which is I usually describe as Montreal steak spice, but I don't know if that travels to you guys. Okay, I don't know. I don't leave Canada. I don't leave like an hour away from my house. The tasting method is surprisingly accurate. So yeah, with that, thank you for your time. I think.